Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. It's me, your host, Rebecca Sebastian. So glad we're back again for another conversation. And happy December, by the way. Can't believe it. Every day, just one step closer to 2021, am I right? So we just wrapped a really fun series on true crime podcasters. I had a blast meeting and talking to some of my favorites, and as a result, I've met some of you new listeners on social media through those guests. So that's been another really fun, unexpected gift from the last series. And I just want everyone to know that I'm not done interviewing podcasters just because this series is over. Over the last year, I've interviewed dozens and dozens of them, and I will continue to do so. I can always work them into the rotation. So if there is someone you are just dying for me to interview, please let me know. And the best way to let me know is through a message on Instagram or Twitter. You can follow me at DialoguePod. You can also go to my website, RebeccaSebastian.com, and there's a contact form. You can just fill that out, send it, that'll go right to my inbox. And I guess if you want to get really personal, you can leave me a voice message via Anchor, which is my podcast hosting site. I'll link to that in the show notes. I've only gotten one because I didn't even know I had that option, so I don't know how anyone else would, but it was kind of fun. So you could leave me a message if you want to do that. You hear my voice, I can hear yours. So I'll link to that in the show notes. And as always, I do welcome your feedback, guest suggestions, just saying hello, etc. It always makes my day. Okay, I think we've covered everything, and now we are going to switch gears, and I'm going to tell you what our December series is going to be. And the series was inspired by, I guess, motivated by December, and I was thinking, what does December mean? Obviously, we have the holidays, and I didn't really want to go into like holiday crimes or anything. I actually wanted to go into kind of a mindset of generosity and giving. And so I thought there's so many great organizations, nonprofits, and advocates doing work in the crime and criminal justice space. And so I thought December would be a really great month to highlight the work of these groups because that work is not easy. It's slow and quiet and behind the scenes. It's not splashy and in your face, but it's so important. So that's what we're gonna do. I think these interviews the next few weeks, especially today's, are a really important reminder that true crime, while certainly a genre that could be categorized as entertainment, is ultimately about real people who have suffered some of the worst atrocities imaginable. And, you know, as my personal interest in true crime has grown over the years, so too has my heart for justice. And this podcast is a place where I get to explore that with some of the leading experts and alongside all of you, which has been just such a privilege. And today's episode just fits in with this mindset perfectly. Today you're going to hear from Bruce Maitland, the founder of the nonprofit called PI for the Missing. More importantly, he's the father to Brianna Maitland, who went missing at age 17 in 2004. Bruce is the perfect advocate for the families who have a loved one missing because he knows firsthand that experience intimately. Instead of staying idle and turning inward, Bruce has chosen to step out and help other families in similar situations to his. Through his vision, Private Investigations for the Missing seeks to, at no cost, fill that need by providing to families with a missing loved one qualified, expert investigators to work on and hopefully locate or bring some form of closure for them. Bruce and I discussed his experience after Brianna went missing and what made him start the organization and what keeps him going. If you want to delve more deeply into Brianna's case, which remains unsolved, I've linked to the episodes done by Tim and Lance of Crawl Space and Missing Mara Murray, who also serve on the board of PIFTM. Now, they've done such an in-depth, great job on that case, and they continue to explore it and pursue it. So I'm just directing you all there because what Bruce and I did today was not about case specifics and Brianna's story of what happened. It's so important, but other people have done and are doing great work in that. I really had Bruce on to talk about PI for the Missing and how we, you and me, can get involved with that component of Brianna's story because this intersects directly with her case and the cases of many others, as you'll hear Bruce share. Of course, a link for PI for the Missing will be found on the show notes, and I encourage you to visit their website, follow them on social media. They cover a different missing persons case nearly every day, and just seeing these faces and hearing some of the details and statistics behind their face and their story just really drives home that this is personal and this is real and this is someone's lived experience. So I would encourage you to do that. And I know at the end of this conversation, you're going to feel as honored as I did to hear from Bruce. And please make note to stick around for a special outro after our conversation. Thank you so much to Bruce Maitland for trusting me with your story and for killing the small talk. Okay, Bruce, thank you so much for being on Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm really honored to have you with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've wanted to talk to you for a while, and the specific reason I'm bringing you on in particular for this series is I want to highlight people who are doing advocacy work, people and organizations that sort of surround true crime to help advance causes, cold cases, seek justice, etc. And Private Investigation for the Missing is an organization that has been on my radar because I have friends involved on the board, Tim and Lance from Crawl Space, Michelle Kazuba. All of these people have been guests on Dialogue. And I know you're really responsible for starting that organization on the heels of a really horrible experience in your life that I'm sure you wish had never happened. So I'm grateful that you're here to share that. So maybe, Bruce, we could start with the why it started, which would be starting with the story of your daughter, Brianna, and what happened in 2004.
Yes, on March 19th, 2004, my daughter went missing. Her car was found bashed into an abandoned house. She was leaving work, and it's something you just, no one ever wants to go through. But nothing's been really heard from her since or about her since, and there's been just over the years numerous leads. Almost all of them lead to dead ends or no ends, and it's just some tragic circumstance. And that led me to realize over the course of what happened to her and me dealing with it over the years and me interacting with a lot of people, family members of other missing persons is the best way to say it. But it's just there's just such a need for it, and that's what was just kind of driving in the back of my mind for a long time.
So I've heard family members who have loved ones killed and murdered in cases describe it as a club nobody wants to belong to. But I would imagine it's probably a similar feeling, this awful camaraderie you must share with other family members who have a missing loved one, which is such a unique experience that I would imagine it's hard to relate to anybody who hasn't gone through it.
Yes, that's true. I mean, it's a really uniquely bad experience, and people handle it, I found, in two different ways. I mean, there are some people that seem to, unlike an experience, let's say a military experience where you kind of go through it with a group of friends and people that become really close to you. You can kind of interact and deal with those people, and that sort of becomes like part of the healing process. With a lot of family members, is what I found is they just kind of shut down. They'll talk to other people that have been through that experience in a little bit here and there, but they don't tend to associate in larger groups and self-help groups and that sort of thing. They almost just kind of close down and shut it off, and then they each deal with it in their own way.
And then there's isolation. So that can't be moving them forward, I would think, in the grieving process. That's got to be really difficult.
Yes, and I do some of that myself.
You have the tendency, you mean?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
tendency to isolate. And I mean, after my daughter disappeared, and that happened obviously in northern Vermont, and I was married at the time. And Brianna's mother and I, after spending probably a year and a half there, just doing everything we could and trying to cope and trying to find her and doing whatever we possibly could, we moved. And we moved to northern New York State. And one of the biggest, like when we were deciding, well, where are we going to move to? Well, we wanted to move outside of the local news area where the TV and covered it, so that no one that you around you knew kind of what was going on. And so it did give you a little bit of that. You could share it with the people that you wanted to share it with, but it gave you some sense of normalcy, for lack of a better word, in those times. So.
Now that brings up something interesting that I wanted to talk about, but you're framing it differently. So I would think you'd want media coverage. You wouldn't want people to forget about Brianna's story and her existence and her case. But then there is this line where you maybe don't want to be approached and bombarded all the time. So how do you navigate that in between of wanting to keep her name out there and her case alive, but protect your own privacy and experience?
Well, media coverage is something that I learned to use early on. The media coverage is extremely beneficial because
Yeah.
there's one thing that moves law enforcement, it's media pressure. That's a fact.
Yeah.
You learn to use that. And if you're in the area, that's very important, that media coverage. And you learn to interact the media. And I've learned a lot about the media. I mean, the media can be your friend, but the media can be exploitive. The media has its own agenda, which isn't finding your daughter. The media's agenda is to get more viewership and to get more popularity out of whatever press they use. And I mean, even now doing podcasts, I don't say yes to just everybody.
Really?
Yeah. So
So how do you navigate that? How do you what threshold and checklist do you go through to check for motive and what the end goal is of the experience and the opportunity, I guess? How do you weigh it?
well, I pretty much I look at their podcasts.
Hmm.
If someone contacts me and wants me to do an interview, I look at their podcast and I see how they've handled other people. And if
Good.
I feel they've made a joke of it or it's just something in that format, and I can't exactly put my finger on it, but if there's something in that format that I don't like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, so you have a strong intuition and a gut and you decide accordingly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things and I don't know if now's a good time, but it's one of those things. When I started private investigations for the mission, I knew I was going to have to deal with, because it's Brianna's story is integral to how things started.
Right.
I knew I would have to deal with that. And even now, it's not the most comfortable thing. I mean, even sitting here with you, it's like, yeah, I'm doing this, but I'm doing this for the organization and to help other people.
Right.
There is a toll every single time that kind of comes out of it.
I'm not surprised by that, and I'm impressed and amazed that you continue to do it, because I don't think everybody that goes through something really traumatic in life can always push through it to get to the other side in order to help other people. And that's not a criticism. That's just, I think some people just don't heal enough or have the support. So can you talk about what you had to do? Because, in your opening statement on the website, you talk about being emotionally and mentally prepared to do the work of PI for the missing, which we'll get to its mission in a second. But what was that work for you?
Well, I think I'm not really trying to pat my own back. It took years and years and years and years of me just not being able, knowing that there's a need out there, and yet not being able to handle it mentally to be able to do it. And so at some point, though, you just reach a point in your life where you say, all this bad shit has happened, and there has to be some good come out of it. And at the point, the gnawing of the do something to the good overwhelms the stuff that you have to go through to see that happen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I kind of look at it. I just sort of deal with it. I mean, I don't really like overanalyze it. I just deal with it and move on. And I really don't blame anyone that doesn't deal with it in the same way. I mean, I've met people and they just don't, everybody deals with it in a different way. And
Yeah.
that's okay. But for me, I just had to see something good come. So.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what that thing is. That is Private Investigations for the Missing, a nonprofit created by you. You have a board of directors. You work in partnership with law enforcement and different experts and talk about the mission and why you created it. And I think this is really helpful for people to understand, hiring a private investigator is not something most people ever do in life, and certainly under the circumstances you had to. So you unfortunately had to experience that with probably not a lot of training on the best way. So you took that and you started this organization. So talk about what the organization does and what your vision is for it.
Sure. It's I mean the vision is really quite simple, it's the devil in is always in the details, as they say. But I mean, the vision is there's a heck of a lot of people out there that one, private investigators are extremely expensive to do this kind of work, missing people work. This isn't something they can go down and say observe somebody and put in 2 hours time and bill you for 2 hours time and tell you this is what they did. This takes a lot of work, and it gets by the time you charge private investigators charge by the they have to make a living. They charge by the hour. They have expenses, they have travel expenses, hotel expenses, things like that have to be covered. I mean, the top 1% in America is the only one that can really afford to hire a private investigator to look into a missing person case. And the rest of us are all just left with the police. And then in a corresponding note, the police, without being too critical of it, are just not the way the whole entire, and this is throughout the US from people I've been talking, so it's not being critical of any one police department or other, but they're just not set up this way
Hmm.
to look for missing people. Initially, that's been charged to the FBI, and the FBI, in my opinion, does zero, even though that's one of their stated missions, that they should do that, or stated work, or whatever is the better word there, but they just don't. And so therefore it winds up in local law enforcement. And local law enforcement is if someone goes missing, they go through what I call they go through their active stage, where they're out there actually trying to solve this. Let's say if this is easy, we can solve it, and sometimes they do. But then they go immediately in, depends on the amount of time and the person that's missing, and a lot of other factors. They just go into a reactive stage. And at that point, they're only taking information in. They're not actively trying to pursue it. And then it just goes on right from there. It just kind of sort of semi stays in that reactive stage, but it really goes cold fast because they have to deal with what happens tomorrow
Yeah.
and the next day as it is. And that's just the way it is. And so many people, they're left with that.
So two things sort of happen. It slows down quickly if a lot of movement isn't made right out the gate. And then you get a private investigator involved, and it isn't like that's a quick thing either. I would
No.
imagine it adds up very quickly, their time spent. And so you've got both of those things going on. And I'm curious about the FBI. Is there a certain, do you think, like level of priority they assign to cases? Like if it has certain elements, they will prioritize it and help, or I wonder why
Well, if
don't
there's a
they
certain amount of
assist?
like interstate travel or something like that, or it happens to make the national news,
Yeah.
where they can make themselves a big splash out of being involved in it, then maybe they'll deal with it. But
Right.
for the average rank and file person, there's nothing. People have to, I mean, you have to I mean, not everybody can do what I did. I mean, I took a lot of the initiative on myself of trying to find my daughter. That's just the kind of person I am. But not everybody's capable of doing that. The circumstances are not the same. And not everybody will go around and start interviewing people that you think might have done something to your daughter. And that's not the smartest thing to do, and I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. But I did do that as part of it. So so anyhow, getting back to the fact of the cost of it's just literally the costs of it that make this. And then like over some time, investigator of mine, Greg Overacker, that's worked with me for years, he and I kind of worked through a lot of, well, this is what an organization like this ought to do. And we talked a lot about it. So I won't take whole credit for it. He had a lot of really, really good input. And I learned that kind of the key is we have to find the right investigators too.
Yeah.
Not just somebody that'll work for on the cheap. It's somebody with the right mindset. and wants has some experience, but also has a little bit of a mission statement in it. And because I found out with I had hired some investigators to work on my daughter's cases, but if someone's really, and this is just a human nature, if someone's really motivated and they really want to sink their tooth in and they're really interested, they're going to be the person that's going to get results.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought this up because I would think vetting an investigator is probably as important as having one because that would be an easy way to get ripped off and get nowhere faster.
Yes.
To have somebody not trustworthy or, just not that good. So it's great that you've established this partnership with Greg. What else do you wish you knew before you hired your first investigator?
I just kind of stumbled into it sort of in a backward state of way, but investigator, I didn't really hire investigators other to do specific things right off. So it was like, I want you to interview this person and I want you to provide me with this information from that interview. So I didn't really learn, there wasn't like this huge thing where I went, down this wrong road with somebody for a long time and learned a lot of bad stuff. I was just really fortunate to have, you know, Greg come on the scene a few years into Brianna's being missing.
I would think being an investigator, specifically for missing persons, I know investigators do other types of investigative work. It has to be a bit of a calling. I mean, I don't know. I would want that. I would want what you're describing, which is somebody who has a mission in their work and sees this as something bigger than themselves, but who believes that their skills and abilities could advance that, and could move closer to something. So I don't know how common that is. I have no idea.
Well, there is no investigators that I'm aware of that actually do missing persons work.
Really?
Yeah, so there's who could afford to pay them? There's
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Right.
It's investigators that have some missing persons experience, or at least some criminal experience, and then it's just good investigators
Right. Applying.
that have a sense. And then there's kind of an investigator. Our perfect investigator
Please tell us.
is kind of somebody that's it seems to be one, they're retired police
Okay.
or military investigator that still wants to kind of keep their foot in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you have somebody that's really experienced, sometimes 20-30 years, and they have an interest in it, and they want to do something kind of sort of as a mission. One, they care about the people, and probably in 30 years of police work, they see a lot of people that weren't very well served, and they're really frustrated about it themselves.
Mm.
So they start. A lot of times, these people, still do some investigative work on the side, and they get their licensing, and they do it right. But every investigator does process surveying, and they do different things like that. Maybe they're observing people doing whatever. And so they all do that kind of do what they need to do to get, bring in the money.
Sure.
Their heart is in something like this.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of retired law enforcement officers, and their minds don't just stop the minute they stop working at their department. They usually are a lot of them really want to stay active and engaged, even in their brain and in that work. I think that's just wired in so many people who are in that line of work. So to continue, it makes sense. Going back to the media coverage, so you've got the official police case kind of gets quiet and they become more responsive to new leads or tips as they come in, but they're not necessarily proactively going out there. Media coverage slows down and dies down. And one thing I'd like to talk about is how and why media chooses the cases that we all hear about over and over versus ones we never hear about. And I always find this part really interesting, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Very young children, we hear,
Yes.
we see their names, and for good reason, right? These are young, completely innocent, helpless small young children who need a caregiver, an adult, they shouldn't be alone or in the wrong person's hands. And then there's a certain type of woman we seem to care about more than other people, from my perspective. And, there's so many new podcasts and stories coming out about people we never hear about, people a little bit more on the margins. And I'm wondering how you perceive Brianna's case in that landscape. Is she sort of in the middle? Could you talk about that and how people perceive her and the story and what you've learned about who gets included in that coverage and who doesn't?
Yeah, I don't have all the answers for you. It seems like, I mean, I agree 100%. If someone is 100% is completely innocent, an innocent child, they go right to the top.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, I mean, you hate to say it, but it's probably based on ratings.
Yeah.
I mean, the media knows who's going to bring in the biggest ratings, and then the next stage would be a person of well, obviously, if someone is rich, influential, or well known or anything, and they have a missing person, oh my gosh, that's a media blitz.
Yes.
But for the regular average person, I would say, then they still want someone kind of innocent. There's certainly, if the person is involved in anything at all, that the media attention scale drops down for that. I mean, Brianna's, I think some of it was the fact that we lived in a really, really rural area.
Mm.
If she would have disappeared in suburbia, where a lot of people can identify with that a little more, I think it would have been a lot more popular. In the case, not to compare, with Mara Murray's case, but I mean, she was a student, at UMass, so I think that had a lot to do with the fact that it kind of became more interested in. There's a tinge of racism in it. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, the facts, and I don't know in part whether, and I hate to make that claim without anything really 100% to back it up. Do they fact that, maybe some of the non-white missings that come from a urban area get less attention just because there's so many more that happen there, statistically? Or whether it is racism, I don't know, but I suspect it is.
Yeah. I suspect the same thing, and it's easy for me to, I'm sometimes like blaming the media, but I think they're just giving back what people want. So I actually put the onus a little bit more on us and what we tune into and what we click on and what we share and what we prioritize. That's all they're feeding back at us. And you're right, the bottom line is the viewership and the dollars. So, but they're only doing that based on what we're giving them. So I think, prefer as consumers less complicated cases, and children are less complicated, and middle class suburbia is something the dominant person in America, the heteronormative person, can relate to, and so that's safer. These messier stories where there might have been drug use or sex work, then it just gets complicated for people, and maybe we don't want to care as much because, well, maybe they took risks, and that's something different, because then, I don't know, people's ability to care as much is compromised, unfortunately. I don't agree with that, but I think that's what happens. And it just breaks my heart. So are you thinking about that when you're structuring private investigations for the missing? How do you want to expand, your ability to help different kinds of people?
Most definitely. I mean, that's certainly in our goal. Is we want to serve the people that aren't getting served, that can't afford it, that never had a decent investigation to start with, and that's who. I mean, primarily right now we're in the stage where we are primarily, because of the lack of funding, we're in kind of a reactive stage ourselves. I mean, if someone contacts us and they have a missing loved one, I mean, we try to do the best we can for them.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a case that we think we have any chance of being able to help with, we'd like to be able to have an investigator there. If we can't, Tim and Lance do some of this. Sometimes we'll do something to try to, at the very least, publicize that case. But the point is right now we're mostly taking in cases that actually people reach out to us. And in some way, that's also integral to us. I mean, we have to we've had some people that have reached out and then they've just kind of ghosted us too. So it's like you as a family have to be involved a little bit
Oh, yeah.
because you have to be part of this. I mean, and not to say we want you to do legwork, but you have to be involved in some way. And so it's right now it limits us, but we definitely I mean, as a mission statement and a personal goal of mine is I definitely want to serve the people of color or people that have gotten no service really from the police to speak of. They get it in a report and it's over.
Yeah.
And people that, haven't always made great choices in life. That doesn't necessarily, you deserve all the same services in finding your loved one, regardless of where you're at. So I feel really strongly about that.
She's Birdie, my favorite personal safety alarm, is back to sponsor today's episode. Some of you have reached out and asked me, is it really easy to use? Is it actually that loud? The answer to your questions is yes and yes. I created a little video over the weekend and I added it to my highlights on Instagram, and I demonstrate just how easy it is to use and just how loud it is. Here are the facts you need to know. According to the CDC, 1 in 5 women in the US will be raped at some point in their lives. This is a horrifying statistic, and the female founders that started She's Birdie started it because they envisioned a world where women's safety is a given. They want to help activate women and accelerate change. It's their mission that you and your loved ones use this tool to stop a potentially life-altering tragedy. And if that wasn't enough, for every alarm purchased, She's Birdie gives 5% of their profits to partnering organizations that passionately support women's safety, shelter, and health. Get a She's Birdie, give a She's Birdie. It is the greatest gift I hope you never have to use.
Thank you for listening to another great show on the Crawl Space Media Network. I'm Jared Ortis, host of another show on the CSM Network, Even the Podcast is Afraid. And I wanted to tell you about the newest addition to the Crawl Space Media family with a trailer for my new show, Southern Oddities. The South is full of history, tales of the strange, creatures that defy logic, outlaws who took towns, and roadside curiosities that still attract visitors scratching their heads in wonder and confusion. Folk tales and stories are tradition in the southern United States, passed down from tradition to tradition, just like Grandma's best Sunday brunch recipes. These tales helped create exaggerated mysteries, stories of legends, stories of our history, stories of the South. I'm Jared Ortis. Most days I'm hosting and producing Even the Podcast is Afraid, a comedic true crime and paranormal podcast focusing on serial killers, demons, cults, and more macabre history. I have always been fascinated by the bizarre and the unnatural, those strange anomalies that one can create. As a Southerner, born and raised in Alabama, I decided it was time to share the tales of the people, places, and things that make up the unusual oddities of the South. On November 16th, the tales will begin with the premiere of Southern Oddities. Twice a week, I will bring you stories from all around the South of the interesting people, the unexplained places, and the mysterious artifacts that helped shape legends of the Deep South. Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app to listen to the show for free. Grab your sweet tea, gather around, and let's spin a yarn. Welcome to Southern Oddities.
When a person goes missing, their loved ones often find themselves overcome with worry and grief. Bruce Maitland started the 501c3 nonprofit organization Private Investigations for the Missing because he knows this feeling all too well.
When Bruce's daughter Brianna disappeared in March 2004, he was surrounded by licensed private investigators dedicated to finding her. Now his mission is to provide dedicated private investigators at no cost to other families of the missing, desperate for answers but without the financial means.
Private Investigations for the Missing needs your help. To read the mission statement, make a donation, and keep up with our blog, visit us at investigationsforthemissing.org and follow us at PI for the Missing on Twitter and Facebook and Investigations for the Missing on Instagram.
because forever is too long to wait.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that we would adapt our effort or energy in looking for somebody, that there would be conditions on that. I just have a big problem with that.
Me too, but I think it's exactly what you say. We get who we are
Yeah.
from the press, and I don't know how to cure that. I really don't.
It starts with us. I mean, that's all I can say is I am a broken record about this, but it's like I do the best I can until I know better, and then I do better. Maya Angelou said it, and that's all I know how to do. So I have these conversations with people who can affirm what I'm saying through their either official research or anecdotal evidence, and maybe just slowly start changing minds to look at things differently and to question what we are and aren't seeing and who's missing from these missing stories. And social media, I think, has been really helpful with that in the age of information moving faster. I think social media is where a lot of that happens, and that's not mainstream. It's almost mainstream because the reach is so big, but maybe it's not the evening news. But I follow feeds of people who are missing who were gender variant, or non-conforming. And so it's really complicated, those cases, because maybe their families thinking they're male, but they were living as a female. It gets so complicated. But there are places now who are educating and communicating those stories. So I think it's going to be a slow shift, but I'm hoping we're in it. I don't know. I don't know.
So. I get frustrated too, and I don't watch the genre that much, but it bothers me. There's a couple things that in the whole crime thing that bother me. One is TV shows that just they move everything along and they solve it in an hour. That bothers me because it's just people's expectations of, if it isn't this, and if they don't already have somebody that they think is a suspect and they don't, there's a whole warped set of expectations about everything and how it works. And the other thing that bothers me too is we keep hearing like a lot of, and this is a stab out at podcasters and probably not you but it's just like, it seems like a lot of them just go over these same like major cases over and over and over again. How about, every time I turn the TV on, there's somebody doing something on DB Cooper or something. And it's like, good grief, the guy jumped out of an airplane with some money, and it's like, there's a lot of people out there that could use a little help and a little attention, a heck of a lot worse than you could pick 10 cases and you probably know them by heart that are just done over and over and over again. And it's like, all the information's been out there.
I literally call those the Big Ten. They're the ones we can all name and we know all the details, and there are just countless other stories. But I do, again, this goes back to us as the consumers. I think that messy middle is not where we like to be. We love a beginning, a middle, and an end. And these open-ended stories, even for me, I'll be honest, Disappeared is a hard show for me. And Unsolved Mysteries, even the like spooky ones, just because it leaves this lingering what if and I don't know. And it is so much easier to operate in the black and white. And unfortunately, that is not a choice you get when your loved one is missing. You live in the gray for, right now for you, it's been 16 years. Like that's not an option for you. So I do think we need to increase our palate to be able to do that, exercise that muscle, but it's hard. It's hard. Mm-hmm. But I have the same criticism. But I will say, I think there are more and more independent podcasters doing more work on expanding the genre to include more stories. And that is a really positive that I see. On a personal level, because a lot of us, hopefully, many of us won't ever experience this personally, I hope. But if we do encounter somebody, what is something helpful we can say to somebody who's missing a loved one, and what is something, hurtful or not helpful, just for our own, awareness in working with other people?
The best thing that people have just told me is, hey, I heard what happened to your daughter, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that happened. And then just be done. Mm-hmm. That's really worked best for me over the years. Even now, I don't like to talk about it, and where I live right now, the people that I deal with, outside of my own family, but any of the people that I deal with, friends with, that sort of thing, they don't know anything about this.
Wow.
And that's, in a way, that's easier for me
Sure.
because I can have a bit, and a couple of times, just a few people that I do come in contact with, because I'm in Pennsylvania now, I'm not near Vermont. So occasionally when I come across a couple of people, and all of a sudden somebody will have heard something at one time or another, and they'll come in and say, hey, I'm sorry for what happened. And that I'm okay with.
Yeah.
I like the question to stop there.
Got it. Got it. So it's not an invitation to get into it, but acknowledging it is okay for you. It might not be
Yes,
the answer
just
for everybody.
acknowledging
But
of it is fine.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes it's sort of like death, when someone gets cancer and you don't know what to say or if you should bring it up. It's that feeling that I think I would
Yes.
have. And so hearing you say that, if you're sincere and genuinely want to express that wish, I think that's okay. But maybe
That's okay.
take
Yes.
the read from them, gauge their response on if you want to discuss further. That's totally reasonable. For the organization, are you focused on any other cases right now? And you don't have to name them. And are they regional to where you are, or kind of spread out?
They're in the Northeast right now.
Okay.
Everything we're working is in the Northeast. We have some people in Maryland. We have New York, Massachusetts, but I am in touch with some other people. I just opened an investigator that's going to start working with us in the Sacramento, California area. There's some people in different other states that have expressed interest in it, and we're kind of moving forward with that to get them set up. And now we're in a situation where, we're now actually kind of turned a little corner because we're in a situation of now we're going to start looking for cases for that investigator.
Wow.
I don't think we'll have problems with cases, but we do want to have we are somewhat specific. I mean, we have to find a case where the family is willing to work with us,
Yeah.
because that's where we're going to start. And then, we have to find a case. Our preferred area is really to work in that reactive stage with the police. Once the case has, and I call it the reactive stage. That's my own terminology, but when the case goes cold, you could use that terminology too. But that's where we want to be, in that area, not in the hot case.
Yeah.
Not in the person that disappeared last week.
Right.
The police are around, and it's just, it's a nightmare at all stages, but especially at that stage, it's not a stage where we want to be.
Yes, that makes sense. Is there an average timeline of cases you're engaging from the disappearance to where they are, or has it ranged in terms of
it's
years?
all over the place.
What's the longest that's kind of on the radar right now?
Early 80s.
Wow.
Yeah. The Franelich case,
Oh,
which
Erica.
Greg has been working hard. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Gosh. I can't believe how long ago that sounds, and that I was alive. It just really, really is difficult for me to get my head
You
around.
were very young then. You had to be.
I was very young, but I was still alive, and I can't believe how many decades ago it was. So I wanted to know if there was a highlight of the organization for PI for the Missing, something that happened when you got that feeling like, okay, this is why I'm doing it. This is that positive thing. This is why I'm getting up and focusing my energy here. Has there been something like that?
Sure. I would say the highlight has really been, and it just jumped back to that case, the Franelich case, when Erica's family kind of got a hold of me and, just said, thank God you're doing something, because, you've done more for us in the last, 6 months to a year than the New York State Police ever did for us. And, we kind of know, we sort of know what happened in some ways, but she was just so grateful that somebody cared enough, because they had just given up. Simple as that. They had just given up that anybody would ever look or care. As a result, it kind of brought them into high gear too, because that's, once again, I jump back to the family. It's integral that the family gets in. They start to get, banging on the police door and get them to start to open things up and do what they should be doing. So that's really what it's all about.
Yeah.
I mean, and I knew from my own experience too, I mean, obviously the success line is finding a missing person. That's the ultimate in success. But I knew from my own mental health and well-being, whenever things were really being worked on, I felt better. I could deal with life and kind of move on with the rest of the thing. You don't tend to get, because you just know something's being done out there.
Hmm.
And then you're obviously anxious to hear news and different things like that. So it helps the families themselves cope with it.
Yeah.
Someone else cares, gives a shit, and is going to do this for them. And then, they're actually doing something. And so it has a lot of benefits to people, not just in the ultimate goal of solving, just to know that, because, that's what happens. People go missing, everything closes up. uh, the communications break down with the law enforcement, goes into a file somewhere, and everybody just sort of weirdly deals with it in their own separate way. And we like, when we come into something like that, we kind of like break into that.
Right.
It's like, okay, now we're going to try to, make some stuff happen.
Shake it up a little.
Absolutely.
And that's where the potential for momentum is. And momentum happens when things get stirred up and start moving again, as opposed to being stagnant. So I could
Yes.
see people finding hope just in the movement.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
That
That's
makes-
a huge factor.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So what is your role? It seems that you're involved. So on a day-to-day level, what are your priorities for PI for the missing? And
Well, my
are you
priorities for the-
working elsewhere too? I would imagine. You're still working.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I thought I figured.
Yeah. I mean, I have my regular job. I have the farm here. I have, a million other things to do, and that's good. It keeps me mentally healthy.
Yes.
So I have, my PIs for the missing is one room I go into, and my Brianna room is another room that I, go into. But there's always something going on. I've got a heck of a group of volunteers. It's just, oh my gosh, I've been blessed with.
I know some of them.
Yes, I mean, they're just amazing people.
I know.
So I have some really good volunteers, but I made it really clear to all of them that, I think Michelle put it quite well there one time. We don't, in this organization, we don't argue about the knives and the spoons we're going to have for a dinner. Everybody, even the volunteers, they know that it's okay. We all have the same heart and the same mission. So therefore, if someone makes the move and does something, we're kind of all good with that.
Mm,
So it runs really well.
good.
So, I mean, I do get contacted, and obviously get copied on emails of different things that's going on. But if I don't really have a objection, and I don't, to what's going on, I let things roll.
Yeah. So you have a lot of faith in them.
Yeah. And I'm practically, I mean, I know enough about a computer to be dangerous. I mean, and social media is the same way. I mean, I'm not a social media person. So someone else is handling all that part of it.
Sure.
And the idea of making posts every day or doing things like that, that's just not me.
Yep. No, that's play to your strengths, Bruce. Yeah. Yeah. Let someone else do that.
I hope to be a good leader by just, delegating volunteers to, but I don't know. Is that some kind of an oxymoron? I don't know. Delegating volunteers if they're already volunteering.
No, it's not. Nope. I think a good leader knows how to utilize people who want to help and know what they're good at, know what they're not, and aren't too proud to say it. I think that is a great leader. What does private investigations for the missing need? And I'm sure money is the top of the list. And don't be, shy about what you're looking for in terms of funding. Like, do you have a strategy? Would you want to put more focus on like crowdsourcing money from regular people, or are you going after donors? And beyond money, what can we do? How can people get involved?
Well, quite frankly, everyone would love the big donor. And we've had a couple of big donations.
Good.
That really has, big donations in the sense of, $5,000 range. But for the most part, it's been small donations,
Okay.
10, 20, 50, $100. And they seem to add up to what we're doing now. And the combination of all that has kept us afloat. We're be able to pay investigators expenses for different cases that they're doing. The investigators themselves have done that, but for us to really grow, obviously I would love to have more big donors because it seems so easy, but people that are willing to donate big, few and far between. It's
Yeah.
we're depending on really those small donations from a lot of different people. And what the problem with the charity, in the sense, and I joined a big clearinghouse right when I started. I paid for that. That one came out of my own pocket too, but it was like a clearinghouse for charities. So it's listed all these charities and
Mhm.
contact, or all these people all over the states, different foundations to contract. But what I found out, and it was a great website, great search engine. But what I found out is, we don't fit any of those niches. And we're not already an established nationwide charity. We don't have our goal in working with people that crime victims is not the norm, and it just doesn't fit into what people that run these charities and run these foundations that just give out money, and that's what they do. It just doesn't fit into it's just kind of odd that way.
Yeah. What little I know about nonprofit work is that it's actually very results oriented. So they want these charts of like the problem and the solution, and for the money to be put towards the solution. And yours is open ended. There are not guaranteed results, as
Yes.
opposed to feeding hungry people. Like, this money will buy this much food, this many families will get it.
Yes.
And that's just a fact and a reality that would make this really challenging. I see that, and I see that that increases the need tenfold for people to step up. But it's truly a donation of good faith.
Yes.
That's hard. That's really, really hard, but so important.
Yeah, because it's hard for us to say. I mean, none of the cases that we intend to enter into are easy cases.
Right.
If they were easy, they'd have been solved by the police within the first 2 weeks.
Exactly.
So it's all hard cases. And then, on top of that, there's some old cases. And I just can't bring myself to say, no, I will not look at a person's case because I don't think it's solvable. I just can't do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I just hope to find enough good people that kind of really get the message, that will be able to keep us rolling.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to break a case, and break a big case, and we're hoping that we can really generate some news media, and at that point, maybe the thing will really just take off, and at that point, run on its own.
Right.
It's exactly right. It's results based, and that's a very hard thing for charities like ours to do.
Yeah. Breaking a case would generate so much. It would position you well to be swooped up and, supported in a new way. So we'll be hoping and praying for that.
Providing the person in that case is interesting to the press.
Well,
right?
yeah, let's hope she is our perfect victim or person. Good Lord. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Let's bring it back to, why you're here, which is Brianna. And when you think about her, and I know it's hard, and I know you don't like to talk about that part so much, but I'm going to, if you will, ask, how do you like to imagine her all these years later? Because she was just a girl the last time you saw her. She was a teenager. How do you imagine her now?
Well, I do go there sometimes, and I wonder, well, especially as the years click off and the ages click off, and she would be, started to think about this. I think a lot more since Brianna would have been 30. To say, well, what would it have been like? Would she have had kids by now? Would she have had a family? What would she have done? And how would it been? But that's kind of torturous. It really is. So I try really hard not to allow my mind to do that, but it does still do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the questions you had asked about earlier was about, what keeps you up at night. And yeah, that happens at night. Okay, it does.
How could it not?
In the middle of the night, and you start thinking about all that stuff, and it's like, wow, and the other thing that kind of bothers me and keeps me up at night too is, it's the father's primary job is to protect his daughter. And, it's hard to avoid, the feelings that come with what all happened, So it's, yeah, that one there keeps me up at night too. So sometimes.
You're a human, and I think any of us that have children know, we won't do anything to protect them from anything bad that will ever happen. And I think, I don't know, the older my kids get, the more I realize I can't. And
Yes.
the world can be a really scary place full of risks, unseen and seen. And that's just not your burden to carry. I'm sure that doesn't help.
Logically, you can logic yourself through that.
I know.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's still,
I know.
once it happens, logic is not always on your mind. Logic doesn't wake you up at night.
Nope. Absolutely not. Heartbreak does, and what ifs and the racing brain.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I hope people discover PI for the Missing, what they're doing, and will follow on social media. I'll make all that available.
Yes.
I'll point them to the other podcasts that you've been on to hear more about Brianna's case if they don't know. And if people are so inclined, we'll of course have the link for anybody who would like to contribute, because I can't think of anything better. I just, even just the mental, what it would mean mentally for families to know there are people who are willing to listen and read the words of those. That's why I know Michelle and Jillian post those stories on Instagram, and I read them. I read every single one, because I think if it was my cousin or mom or daughter, someone taking 2 minutes to read this little profile of who they were. Also, you never know who knows something. And that goes back to shaking it up. So
if I could say one more thing that I could add, I mean, this is the time of year.
Please.
When people do tend to, they look at their finances.
Yeah.
They see where they're at, if they're going to make some kind of a donation. But I've always reiterated this, and this is as long as I'm alive and running this organization, it's going to stay this way, is that, all the money that we take in goes toward helping families with missing children. It basically goes into paying the PIs and their expenses, and sometimes a small hourly stipend. It depends from one to the other, what they're willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where all the money goes, all of it.
I'm glad you're saying that.
Not dinners, not salaries for us,
Yeah.
board members, not any kind of nothing. There's no point in describing what else it could be, because there is nothing else.
Yeah.
So if you get tired of giving to organizations where 10 or 20% of the money goes toward the cause and the rest goes for because what I've learned in this whole nonprofit stuff, and you start to look at other nonprofits, not to criticize other nonprofits, but they're like corporations.
Yeah.
Big money, big donors, and
the overhead is huge.
It's huge, right?
Yeah. So you guys are small and nimble, and the money goes right to the project, to the mission and the work.
Yes. And as we grow, we intend to be bigger, but still be small and nimble.
Wow. I love that.
More volunteers, more PIs, and just keep reaching out and moving from there.
Well, thanks for sharing your story, and I hope this will help raise awareness for PI for the Missing and Brianna's story, and I hope you have a happy and healthy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Bruce. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Bruce, and if you are anything like me, it might have moved you in such a way that you want to get involved. I just want to encourage you, if you have any inkling at all to get involved, to go to PI for the Missing's website. It's in the show notes. And if you're able to make a donation, as you heard Bruce say, this is comprised of small $5, $10, $15, $50, $100 donations. This is a crowdsourced operation, which I think is really beautiful. And I know it's been a really hard year for people, but if you have the capacity and desire to give, I would encourage you to do so. I think this is such a worthy cause for a group of people who really suffer kind of silently and are easy to not forget about intentionally, but just not to be aware of. So I want to help raise awareness for PI for the Missing and funds if possible. Of course, if you or someone you know might be interested in speaking further about this cause and maybe want to take advocacy to another level or introduce a donor, of course, I would be happy to make the introduction to board members of PI for the Missing or to Bruce Maitland himself. So please reach out to me if that applies to you. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. And we're ringing in the holidays, I think, in the perfect way, which is thinking about others. Thank you so much. Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebecca Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to Dialogue, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation.